Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome back to class. This week we're going to look at Chapter 1 in our textbook. And the interesting thing about Chapter 1 is it really begins before 1900. So if you think about this class in the time period that we're supposed to be covering, we're covering history from 1900 till current day, all the way forward. But the book starts a little bit before that, and it's important to understand what came before 1900 because in order to understand really the evolution of consumerism and industrialization and that sort of stuff, you got to know what came before 1900. So I'm just going to briefly touch on that. The first thing I want to talk about is this notion of the Industrial Revolution. So when historians talk about the Industrial Revolution, as most of you know from high school, they're referring to the growth of industry and factories in England in the 1700s, and basically from the early 1700s on forward, and even before the 1700s a little bit. The first crude steam engine was actually invented in the late 1600s, and it's the steam engine and water power and other inventions that all came out of Britain that really had a lot to do with manufacturing textiles and iron. It's those industries that really grew, and they created this working class in England, the creation of the English working class. There's a matter of fact, there's a book called The Creation of the English Working Class. That's a very famous book of British history. But anyway, the Industrial Revolution starts in England, and the Industrial Revolution just refers to this cultural development where humans, invented machines and processes to start making stuff. Before the Industrial Revolution, obviously there were no factories, and everything that was made, tools, farm tools, clothes, shoes, all of that crude stuff, it was all made by hand, many times in the household, but like for tools, at a blacksmith shop or something like that. There were no factories, if you will. So the Industrial Revolution comes along, and it creates this idea of a working class. It creates a blue collar working class, and a class of people that maybe worked in agriculture before, maybe were farmers or peasants before, now have become wage workers. And what that means is they get paid by the hour, just like you or I do on various jobs. They punch in, they're tightly supervised, they work hard, and then they punch out and they make a wage for a factory owner. So the Industrial Revolution starts this idea of wage labor. It really kind of starts this idea of having a job. In all seriousness, I mean, prior to that time, people didn't think about having jobs because basically what you did during the day, you probably worked in your garden or worked gathering or worked helping someone in bartering for food. And so there wasn't really a job type thing. But the Industrial Revolution comes along and it changes everything. All of a sudden, there are jobs and there are constraints of time. The notion of the clock and time becomes really important during the Industrial Revolution. Before that time, no one needed to know what time it was, when there's nothing going on. There's no transportation, there's no communications, there's no anything. All that matters is sun up and sundown because you're basically living an agricultural life. So Industrial Revolution changes everything, and it creates this English working class, and we quickly find out, just like any of us on our jobs, suddenly the working class doesn't like the cruel conditions of factory life or of working life. And just like anything else, one of my sort of laws of history is that when you oppress or torque a group of people off, they're going to rise up. And certainly when we talk about the opening of this book and the first chapter, the author talks about Karl Marx, and Karl Marx is the guy who came up with this idea of socialism and communism. He writes the Communist Manifesto, and he does this in 1848. And 1848 is sort of where I start the course, only because Karl Marx was writing then, and I will try to explain to you the significance of Marx. And the other thing, in 1848, there was a big women's convention in Seneca Falls, New York. Women had no rights in the U.S. at all whatsoever. I mean, they weren't even able to vote until 1920. So in the 1840s, 1848, the women's movement really sort of rose up in the U.S. And I bring that up because I want to try to place context around the world to us what's going on. So in Europe, the Industrial Revolution is raging in England and in some areas of France and Germany. Factories are being built, and this new working class is discovering what a bummer it is to be a wage laborer. And Karl Marx is writing about the idea that eventually these workers aren't going to take it anymore. They're going to rise up. They're going to take over the means of production, and we're going to have this communist or socialist state where workers own everything. That's what Marx was talking about, and he only wrote about that stuff because he and Frederick Engels saw what was going on in England at the time and saw how crude and dreary factory life was. The rise of these urban slums of workers, and so that's why Marx was writing. And Marx's work inspired a bunch of labor movements, even in the U.S. And we don't need to go on about it, but I just want to let you know this idea of socialism, like this idea of the workers taking over, came in the mid 1800s, and so did the rise of the Industrial Revolution. So keep that in mind. It's important because by the time we get to 1900, which is kind of where our course starts, we have all these new inventions and all these new technologies, many of them due to this Industrial Revolution that took place. And besides the technologies and the inventions, we also have a lot of cultural baggage, I guess I'll say, about labor and about nationalism and about a lot of other of these forces that are going to take place in this chapter. So the chapter is important. Again, it talks about a lot of developments. I'm just going to run through a few things really quick, and then I'm going to go over the quiz for the week. So if you watch the video this far in, you're going to know the quiz and know all the answers. If you don't, you're not. So there's that. So before we move on, let me just riff a little bit and talk about sort of the, why is 1900 important? Why is and the year itself isn't important, but why would a class like this that just looks at the 20th century, because the 1900s are the 20th century, right? Why would a class like this just look at the 1900s on forward? How can that be a history class? What happened? And well, obviously, we had two big world wars, and some of the wars that you weren't born yet, but like Vietnam, so we had that, and war in the Middle East, the stuff you guys are familiar with. So those are big events, but the thing to think about in the 1900s, okay, think about these technologies that were invented, okay, the automobile, the radio, television, the transistor, the laser, refrigeration. I mean, come on, that's a huge one. The airplane, so flight, radar, plastics, air conditioning, the atomic bomb, artificial intelligence. We talked a little bit about Chat GPT, fiber optics, the internet. I mean, these are all things in the 20th century. So it's a huge century, and it only happens because of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution really only happens for a number of reasons. As far as technology is concerned, the Industrial Revolution happens because of the steam engine, because the steam engine is the beginning of machines being driven by something other than human power or water power, and then the invention of the railroad. Well, the railroad couldn't be invented without the steam engine, so the steam engine had to come first. Once the railroad came, there was a way to transport raw materials and finished products to and from factories other than water power, like canals. So these things are all huge. These engineering achievements are inventions. So the railroad for sure, electrification, no real widespread use of electricity before 1900. And it's huge. As a matter of fact, I wrote a book about it. And so electrification changes everything. It changes, the way things are manufactured, the way people live, the places people can live. Without electricity and without air conditioning, you don't have a lot of people living in hot climates. But after that happens, you do have a lot of people living in hot climates. And again, the whole notion of like imaging and the advancements in germ theory all happen in the 1900s. That's why a history class that goes from 1900 to current day could all be just about inventions and technology. So we're going to talk a lot about that, but we'll add in these other cultures. So anyway, read the chapter and just kind of think about these huge inventions like flight and electricity that happened during this time period. And lastly, let me do this for you. I'm going to go over the quiz for you really quick. And let me just say, I'm going to give you the quiz answers. So if you pay attention to the videos, most of the time I'll tell you what's going to be on the quiz. This stuff's easy. It's open book. Most of it has to come out of your textbook, but I don't know. You might find it out on the internet too. So the first question asks what liberalism is. Okay, so know what the notion of liberalism is, and it's like it sounds. When something's liberal, it's free of restraint. So liberalism is a way of life where there's not a lot of restraint to people. We live in a liberal society, all right? We have the government, the police, and all that stuff, but basically we do what we want as long as we remain in the confines of what's acceptable. There's a question on the quiz about the Ottoman Empire, and you're going to say, what the heck? Don't worry about it. All you have to do is go to the question, click on a link, and read the link, and then you'll come back and answer the question. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it. Everyone will pass. Everyone will get that one. Okay. Considering chapter 1 of our textbook, this is the next question. Where and when about does the Industrial Revolution start? Well, I just talked about the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain in the 18th century, which is the 1700s, right? So that's the answer to that one. I know I said, hey, there was inventions in the 1600s, and we talked about the 1900s, but Great Britain in the 1700s, which is the same as the 18th century, that's the answer to that one. This one is not in the book. So but if you listen to the lecture, and I hope you do, you'll know that in order for an industrial revolution to take place, an agricultural revolution must come first. Okay, and that's real easy to understand. Don't let anyone ever argue this question with you, because if you don't have an agricultural revolution, you can't feed people. If you can't feed people, you can't have cities, because cities depend on food being brought in, right? So you have to have an agricultural revolution first. You have to be able to farm enough to feed everybody in the big cities. And when you think about it, it is revolutionary. One or two farmers can support, tens of thousands of people, the way advanced agriculture is. So in order for an industrial revolution to occur, an agricultural revolution must always come first. And that happened in London with changes in the way that they farmed, and changes in farming techniques and the use of fertilizer actually also. So there's that part. And the last one is the rise of socialism, or scientific socialism, and or Marxism was a response to what? Okay, so think about this. The rise of socialism and Marxist theory was a response to what? Well, it was, here's the possible answers that I have on the quiz. Darwin's theory has nothing to do with it, so you can throw that one out. Electrification, that doesn't make any sense. Colonialism, we didn't even talk about, but what we did talk about was Marxist theory coming about during a time when wage workers were starting to understand the dreariness of the job. So Marxism is really a response to industrialization, and that is the answer you should put on the quiz. So if you made it this far in the video, you got to see everything on the quiz, and we talked a little bit about technology, and it's a good chapter, and take the quiz. It'll be fairly easy, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care now. Bye-bye.